Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Michigan State, Jonathan Smith starting to gain some serious momentum in the transfer portal, landing a few massive commitments this Sunday, headlined by former five-star cornerback Tony Grimes making his way over from Texas A&M. You add a guy like Tanner Miller, a second-team All-Pac-12 center coming from Oregon State. Tommy Schuster, a quarterback from the FCS level that has played a ton of good football during his time, adding some much needed experience and depth to that quarterback room. Jonathan Smith starting to sink his teeth into the transfer portal for Michigan State. I think we're going to have a lot more commitments to talk about over the next couple of days and weeks. A very exciting time for Michigan State fans. I want to talk a little bit about the commitments, talk a little bit about where this program is heading in the transfer portal. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a shout out to the Michigan State fans. This is a program that many of you guys know has been a very exciting program over the last couple of weeks. Massive fan of the Jonathan Smith hire. We've talked about that extensively over the last month, and you're starting to see Jonathan Smith really get some momentum coming out of the transfer portal. We'll continue to update you guys as the commitments roll in. A ton of buzz, a ton of optimism around this program. Really excited to get into it. If you guys do enjoy the content, you want to support the fellas, consider subscribing to the channel. Again, can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys like you guys have. And without further ado, let's get into Tony Grimes first. We'll cover Tanner Miller, Tommy Schuster, and what Michigan State has done in the transfer portal. The first thing I want to note, and this is something that I think is one of the more impressive jobs Jonathan Smith has done so far at Michigan State, is these commitments aren't necessarily going to show up in the 24/7 sports database, but Michigan State and Jonathan Smith pulling out some really good former Michigan State players that had hit the portal and now are coming back to East Lansing. Those are massive recruiting wins. Guys like Derek Harmon, guys like Chris Bogle, significant contributors for Michigan State in the 2023 season, coming back to East Lansing. Those are massive. And now you add some serious talent in a guy like Tony Grimes, who a very interesting story for Tony Grimes during his time at UNC in the 2021 and 2022 years. This was a guy that had first-round NFL draft buzz, and the film backed it up. And so what excites me most about Tony Grimes is there's not really much of a projection. This is a guy that has put it together at the college football level, and if you get back the Tony Grimes that we saw in 2021 and in 2022, you're looking at a first-team All-Big Ten cornerback. And for a secondary like Michigan State that has struggled so mightily over the last couple of years, getting that lockdown boundary cornerback like Tony Grimes would be absolutely massive. And my favorite part about the Jonathan Smith hires, he maximizes talent. Right? This is a guy in Tony Grimes that from a physical toolkit has checked every box that you want in a cornerback. And now it's Jonathan Smith and his coaching staff's job to get that talent out of them. Jonathan Smith and the coaching staff at Oregon State thrived under that. And I think you're going to get the best out of a guy like Tony Grimes. And if you do, this is one of the better cornerbacks immediately at the Big Ten level. A little funny story about Tony Grimes. So on paper, he's going to be a fifth-year senior. He actually skipped his senior year, enrolled in North Carolina early. So essentially still a guy that is still physically maturing from a physical standpoint, really only going into his fourth year of college football. So I think there's still some meat left on the bone. And I'm really excited to see what Tony Grimes looks like as he gets coached up by Jonathan Smith and the staff. Next commitment I want to talk about here is Tanner Miller coming from Oregon State. Now, this isn't as flashy as a Tony Grimes commitment. Tony Grimes formerly being a five-star out of high school and having played at such a high level during his time in college. Tanner Miller, a guy that this is arguably the biggest commitment of the day. And you take a look at why that might be. One, Tanner Miller plays both guard and center. So he, is giving us some of that position versatility and adding a ton of depth to this offensive line, allowing you to be flexible with your personnel on the offensive line. But I think most importantly, with a young quarterback like Aiden Childs, who you're trying to build around, one, you're getting an elite pass protector in Tanner Miller. More importantly, a veteran center who Aiden Childs is used to working with, calling out protection, getting the offensive line right at that center position is going to be massive. And Tanner Miller, 6'1", 290 pounds. He's a very good pass blocker, over 414 pass blocking opportunities only gave up 19 pressures. Again, a second team all Pac-12 guy in 2023, a very good run blocker as well. And that Jonathan Smith scheme, where you want to run those zone blocking schemes, get to the second level. Tanner Miller might be a little undersized for a center. He's a phenomenal athlete. And when it comes to working to the second level, picking up those linebackers, that's where Tanner Miller excels. And this is a guy that's a plug-and-play dude at that center position, somebody that Aiden Childs is very familiar with. And Tanner Miller is very familiar with the offensive scheme that Michigan State is going to be running, obviously, coming from Oregon State to join Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. This is one that is not as flashy as a guy like Tony Grimes, but a guy that I think adds a ton of value to what Michigan State is trying to do, especially when you look at Michigan State's goal in 2024. One of those biggest goals is building around Aiden Childs, right? Aiden Childs is the future of this program going into a second year of college football, getting him blocked up for, giving him the weapons on the outside. That was a massive priority for Jonathan Smith, and adding an all Pac-12 guy in Tanner Miller at that center position, going to be absolutely massive. The last guy I want to talk about before we kind of round out the Michigan State transfer portal haul is going out and getting Tommy Schuster from the FCS level from North Dakota, a guy that's played a ton of football at the FCS level. And the most important metric I'm looking at for Tommy Schuster, I mean, he's a winner. He won a ton of games for North Dakota during his time at the FCS rank, has thrown for over 9,000 yards, 63 touchdowns to 23 interceptions. At this point, this is a quarterback room that was Aiden Childs. You got some true freshmen coming in. It was a very young quarterback room, and it is a tricky spot to get an experienced quarterback that kind of knows they're going to come in and be that quarterback too behind Aiden Childs. Getting a guy like Tommy Schuster to come in and be the veteran presence in that quarterback room, a guy that, I mean, hopefully he doesn't have to play any meaningful snaps because that means Aiden Childs has stayed healthy through the whole season. But in a pinch, I mean, Tommy Schuster can come in and win some games at the Big Ten level, a lot of experience, can make things happen with his legs, kind of the ideal quarterback too in this Michigan State offense. And you take a look at what Michigan State has done in the transfer portal, getting to be a really big fan of what Jonathan Smith is doing, and a guy that we haven't talked about. We talked a little Jack Velling, obviously one of the more dangerous pass-catching tight ends in the country, led all of the tight ends and touchdown scores last year. You bring in a guy like Jordan Turner, who's played a ton of linebacker at the Big Ten level. TJ Sheffield adding to Aiden Childs' weaponry on the outside. A guy that we haven't talked about, Quandarius Dunnigan, 10 tackles for a loss, 3 sacks, 8 passes defended in 2023, 16 quarterback hurries, 16 run stops. This is a guy that's going to be, if not a starter, a meaningful rotational player on this defensive line, an extremely quality addition at that edge position. Jonathan Smith starting to check off some serious boxes for Michigan State. Now, the last position group that I would like to see Michigan State continue to develop is maybe grab one more offensive lineman and also maybe one more pass catcher, right? You had a lot of pass catchers leave this program, obviously, in the offseason. You have Aiden Childs, who has all the talent in the world. It looks like that offensive line is going to take some strides, especially under the Oregon State coaching staff. They do a phenomenal job with the offensive line. You probably want to go get one more weapon for Aiden Childs to use on the outside, whether that's former Oregon State wide receiver Silas Bolden. There are a lot of good wide receivers for Michigan State to go and get. And you're kind of selling. You got a quarterback in Aiden Childs who's going to get the football to these wide receivers. I think the selling point with Aiden Childs locked in becomes a little bit easier. I mean, wide receivers are looking for good quarterbacks to get them the football. Michigan State has that with Aiden Childs. So really interested to see if Jonathan Smith goes out, addresses that wide receiver position. That's probably the group that I would like to see him address. But if you're a Michigan State fan, the talent's coming in. I think you have a home run hire with Jonathan Smith, bringing over his staff from Oregon State. Really exciting time to be a Michigan State Spartan fan. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys again. This has been a program that I've had a blast talking about. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.